really. And I saw David last about 5 or 6 years ago, because he's got 2 houses here in Brighton.
No.
Oh, he has, yeah. He bought one. He sort of retreated when COVID came, and I don't think he's really come back. But he's married to a girl called Polly Sampson. Used to be partnered up with Heathcote Williams, the writer. Really good underground, great poet, playwright. And has children with Heathcote as well. And then she met David, and they've been very solid together. She writes the lyrics. And David writes the words for the work that he's done recently. And it's a very strong creative partnership. But he bought an old house. It's in a strange place for somebody that's as sort of, shy is the wrong word, but I mean, he doesn't put himself out there, David. He doesn't want to be, chased around. He's not your average pop star. But he bought a house in a very exposed place, because it's in a really touristy place in Hove. But they then bought a place down the road, same road on the coast. He built a studio at the back of that house, a really lovely self-op studio, loads of lovely features. And then they bought an old Turkish bath about 100 yards away and got permission to alter it and built this massive modern house on the basis that this with serious amounts of money. I mean, we're hundreds of millions we're going into here. And they built this house, and David said to me, well, we're going to build a house, and that I've never been into the new one. But he said, we're going to, and then we'll try it out, we'll move there, we'll live in that, and then we'll decide which of them we're going to keep, and we'll sell the other one, right? So the modern house is on the market now for 15 million or 18 million or something like that. I don't think there are any takers, but it's a ridiculous building. But I think he's still got both of those buildings. But the reason I got in touch with him in 2017 was that I found a guitar that I got in storage, and it's one that I'd lent to him. It's a really weird story. I was given this guitar by a man called John Pierce, who was a television folk presenter in the 60s. He did a sort of learn guitar course called Hold Down a Chord on BBC television. And I got to know him a little bit then, and then he married a lovely lady called Mary Faith Rhodes, who is a Hammond dulcimer player. And I got back into closer contact with John and Mary Faith when I was working with the Wangford Band, because BJ knew them as well. And I was round at John's mum's house in Turnpike Lane one time, and there was this guitar leaning against the wall. I said, what's that? It was a funny looking thing. I said, what's that? To John. It's all on my website, by the way, this story. And he said, oh, it's a thing that was, when I was working at Martin Guitar as a designer, one of my co-designers there, John Huber, built that, and later on he said it was just lying around in the workshop. He said, when I finished working at Martin, I just took it. And he said, I've been using it as a slide guitar, but I'm not really doing anything with it. Listen, if you want it, have it. Well, yeah, that'd be lovely. I'd love to have a weird electric Martin with it, because it got a big Martin decal on it. The Martin Guitar Company is very prestigious. It's one of the oldest guitar companies in the world, and there's a long story that goes with it. I mean, now it's a very different thing to how it was in years gone by. But this was a pretty weird thing. So anyway, I did a bit of research. I played it for a time, but I lent it to David Gilmour. I took it down there just to show him, and he went, oh, that's really interesting. And he kind of liked it. He fell in love with it. So I left it with him, and I said, yeah, if you want it, just borrow it, So I left it with him. And the next thing was, he phoned me up about 9 months later, still with the guitar, and he said, look, I've written a few songs on this guitar, and he said, one of them's on my new solo album, and I'm just about to go off on a world tour, and I want to take your guitar with me. How would you feel about that? And I said, well, honestly, David, I don't know that I feel very good about it. I know what guitars are like when they're on tour. They do get a little bit of manhandling and mistreatment, not intentionally, but things happen. I'm not sure that I'd quite like to take it back. Is there any way around that? He said, don't worry, I'll get it cloned. So he had an exact replica built by Roger Giffin, and I took back my Martin. So I got it, and I'd played it for a while, and then I didn't play it in the manner of things that are kind of off centre and left field, and not sort of ordinary. And it had ended up in storage, and I hadn't used it for a long time. So I took it out of storage. I thought, I'm going to sell this. I needed money. This was, I don't know, 2016, 2017. I had something in mind for a project. And so what I did was I researched it. I got in touch with John Huber, who was the guy who had built it at Martin's. I got his contact from Dick Boak, who was then, he's retired now, but he was the archivist at Martin Guitar. And I told him the story, and Dick, because initially when I got in touch with Martin experts, they said, oh, you're mad, Martin had never built anything like that. This is obviously a hoax, it's just, somebody's, passing it off and all the rest of it. And I knew that wasn't true, because I knew that John Pierce had worked at Martin, and that wasn't going to be the truth of it. So anyway, Dick Boak got back to me, and he said, oh, I know all about this guitar. Yeah, John Huber built about half a dozen of them. He said he gave a couple of them to Christian Martin, and he was building them for himself. I'll put you in touch, he'll tell you all about it. So, and John Huber is, I hope he's still alive, but he was living in Stockholm then. And so I got in touch with him, and he gave me the whole story. He built this guitar to fit his suitcase. It was a touring instrument. And then Christian Martin had seen it as he walked past the workshop one time, the design studio. He said, what's that? And John said, well, I built it as a travel guitar to fit my suit. He said, I like that. Will you make a couple, one for me and one for my friend? And so John made another, and he made about half a dozen of them. And it was a really weird, it was a solid body guitar, 2 pickups, electric guitar, fully electric, but it had many design features, which I won't go into the details of. But it was very unusual. But crucially, Dick Boak, in an email to me, he said, oh yeah, I know this is a prototype. Now that, coming from the man who was the head of the archive at Martin Guitar, that meant this is official, this is the real deal. So I had a prototype Martin, of which there'd only ever been 6, and I got the only one that existed then. All the others were long gone, they'd all been finished. So that let me, it meant that there was some value. But I thought, well, now I've got to tie this into David Gilmour, because he liked this guitar and he used it. And if I sell it, I'm going to sell it on the basis of Dave Gilmour played this on an album of his, because that's going to whack the value up. So I got in touch with David then. So the point of the story is that's the last time I was in touch with David. I think it's 2017. So I took the guitar round to his studio, because he only lives 2 miles away, or then lived 2 miles away. When COVID came, he and Polly left, and I don't think they're back now. And I don't want to bug him, because he's got his own life, you know what I mean? It must be hard being that pre-owned and that famous. Anyway, I took the guitar round to his studio, and he got his guitar tech to bring the clone from London, from his storage base up in London. We brought them to his house, to his studio together in Hove, and put them side by side, and we sat down and caught up and played for a couple of hours, and he showed me his studio and all the rest of it. So that was bloody wonderful. And then I said to his guitar tech, I'm thinking of selling this guitar. I said, it's weird because I don't know what value to put on it. Weirdly, I wish David would buy it. I know he always liked it. And Phil Taylor, David's guitar tech, said, look, he said, don't bother, David. He said, I'll buy it. And I'll give it to David as a present. So he said, what do you want for it? And I said, I don't, the problem is that it's a weird one. It is unique in its own way, but it's not good for everything that guitars do. And its biggest value is that David played it. So, I can't put a price on it. And then I said, I know what. There's an amplifier that David just showed me in the control room in his studio here that is bloody lovely. It's a boutique amplifier. It means it's been custom built by a really, really clever amp builder. And I said, if you get one of those amplifiers made for me and give it to me, I will give you the guitar. And he said, okay, deal. So he went ahead and he had this guitar built. So I now have a Lazy J20, which is a really classy amplifier, beautiful on-stage amplifier. I'd never need for anything else in my life, really, as amps go. And I gave the guitar to David. Wonderfully, when David sold his entire guitar collection 3 years later, he didn't sell the Martin. Now, he sold the clone, the Roger Giffin clone of my Martin. The whole story about where I got the guitar, because I told Phil in writing all the story about John Pierce giving it to me, and how I changed it up and made it very playable and all that sort of thing. That whole story was told in the catalogue at Christie's when they sold it, and when they sold that guitar, it sold for $50,000. I mean, I would have taken $3,000, and as it is, I swapped it for an amplifier that probably would have cost $3,300 or something, you know. But $50,000 just because of the association with David Gilmour. There was another guitar, the guitar that I played on the one of the guitars I played. It's an acoustic guitar that I played on the Wall live album, and it belonged to David or to the band, and that guitar sold for, I think, $395,000. Something completely, utterly bonkers. It was in the, I think 375 or 390, something like that, $1,000. It's, well, I sold the exact same model, an Ovation Legend Custom, from pretty much the same period, and I sold one quite a few years back now, maybe 6-7 years ago, for 900 quid. And this sold for that amount of money because David had played it on albums. It was the guitar that he wrote Comfortably Numb on. Ooh. And it just, you know, the price just skyrocketed because of the glamour of the whole thing. Floyd, Dave Gilmour, songs that are absolutely ingrained in people's existence. So yeah, that was the Floyd stories, and there's many, many, many of them.